I understand this is a state and local government class, and we're going to be talking about Texas and El Paso, city of El Paso, and the county of El Paso, and some other government entities over the course of this semester. But you cannot talk about state and local government without a little bit of background on our national government or our federal government. So back in 1776, the colonies, not all of them, most of you were taught there were 13 British colonies in North America. Depending on how you count them, there were actually 14 or 15 if you count Toronto and Quebec. In Toronto and Quebec, Canada, were not interested in separating from the United Kingdom. So you had the 13 American colonies who chose to separate. They didn't make that decision lightly, and they didn't make it briefly. It occurred over several months of deliberation. So representatives of those original 13 American colonies that became the United States met together at what they called a Continental Congress, a meeting. They went there representing their colonies. Their colonies each had their own colonial governments, and they had to continuously get back with their colonial governments to get guidance and permission to do the things that they did at the Continental Congress. So when we get to the summer of 1776, and they're going to talk about a Declaration of Independence, it was the delegations from those 13 colonies who voted on this. They didn't vote on it in their own name, though they signed the Declaration of Independence with their name. They voted on it in the name of their colony. So the people from New York, the delegates, voted on behalf of New York. The people from Massachusetts did the same thing. So, prior to the Declaration of Independence for what we now call the United States of America, there were 13 colonial governments that each said, yes, we want to declare our independence from Great Britain. So that came first. And then, of course, we did declare our independence from Great Britain and fought a war to make sure that that stuck. Well, here's the interesting thing. We set up basically a preliminary government under what was called Articles of Confederation, not to be confused with the Confederate States of America. And those Articles of Confederation basically said that the colonies would work together. They were sovereign, independent nations, but they would work together because they all realized they could not defeat Great Britain by themselves. Interesting. So, you have 13 colonies who declare independence. They decide to band together, to work together, to fight together. And, oh my goodness, they won. Those 13 colonial militias under the leadership of General George Washington beat the British. Who would have thought that would have happened? They didn't think it would happen. They were fighting what they considered to be a war of attrition. They were hoping the British would just quite simply give up and quit fighting because it was an expensive war for the British. And ultimately that's what ended up happening. So the war's over. They decide that their government under the Articles of Confederation isn't working so much. And so they decide to draw up a new governing document. That governing document is what is our governing document today, and that is the Constitution of the United States of America. An interesting document. It was a benchmark document. It was a document that changed the world and became a model for other governments throughout this planet's history subsequent to that period of time. Because what it said was, and language is important here, a state, in the language of political science, and government is a political science course, what it said was A state, which is a sovereign, independent nation, a state is synonymous for country, nation, things like that. What it said was there were 13 sovereign, independent nations that decided to work together. And so, as a result of that, the Constitution creates a framework for those sovereign, independent nations to join together. The fact of the matter is, the United States is made up of sovereign, independent nations. France is a sovereign, independent nation. Mexico is a sovereign, independent nation. Germany is a sovereign, independent nation. Texas is a sovereign, independent nation. New Mexico is a sovereign, independent nation. New York is a sovereign, independent nation. But in our case, those states came together and said we're going to work together as one under the United States of America. By the way, in the early days of the United States of America, the United States of America had a lowercase u in front of it, an uppercase S, because the S was the states, and that was the most significant part of that phrase, and then of course a capital A because we were in America. So United and America were just adjectives describing the noun states. So it was plural. We never really thought of the United States of America as being one country until right after the American Civil War. So if I were to ask you how many sovereign independent nations make up the United States of America, experience tells me that most of you would say 50, because there are 50 states. The fact of the matter is, there are over 450 sovereign, independent nations that make up the United States of America. And that's because we count the Native American tribes. For those of you who are in El Paso and have traveled to the lower valley of El Paso, you know that the Tigua Indians have a reservation there. And technically the Tiguas are officially named on the Bureau of Indian Affairs rosters as the Isleta del Sur Pueblo. There is a sign in front of the Pueblo governing headquarters that says, "Welcome to the Isleta del Sur Pueblo, a sovereign, independent nation." If you go up to Ruidoso, or the End of the Mountain Gods, the End of the Mountain Gods is owned by the Mescalero Apache. You have to travel to get to Ruidoso through Mescalero Apache lands and by their governing center, and you will pass a sign that says, "Welcome to the homelands of the Mescalero Apache, a sovereign, independent nation." So we're a group of organizations, of governments that have come together and have said, we can't do it alone. We're going to do it under a banner that we call the United States of America. So what does that have to do with Texas and the study of state and local government? Well, it has everything to do with it, because sometimes the state government doesn't agree with the federal government. Texas doesn't always agree with the United States of America. And in fact, currently there are over 30 lawsuits filed on behalf of the state of Texas in federal courts fighting decisions by the federal government. And Texas is not alone. Half of the states in the United States have over 30 lawsuits filed against the United States of America. We try to work things out. It doesn't always happen. That's one of the reasons we have a federal court system. But we do work together most of the time. And that relationship between the states and the federal government, and the relationship between cities and counties and school districts and water districts and the state government and the federal government, these all fall under a category called federalism. There's a chapter in your textbook about federalism and how it works, and how it's worked for Texas, and how it's shaped the political history of Texas. We're going to have some assignments and some exercises that will help you get a better handle of that. In the meantime, use Blackboard course messages to send me any questions that you might have. Hope you're having a great semester.